Majo, John Madden in my camper van in the Boca del Rio section of Veracruz at Playa La Bamba, right there. And I love being here. I'm back to the beach for the first time in a long time. I had spent 3 months in the fabulous city of Xalapa, Xalapa. Mostly in my 10 months in Mexico, I have run along the Gulf Coast, which is where I am again, back by the ocean. I'm super, super happy to be here. But before heading way out east on the Yucatan Peninsula, I've got one friend out in Cozumel in the Mayan Riviera Maya, they say down here. And I am planning to go out there, but I decided, I spent 3 months in the little pueblo of El Diamante, which is right near the Gulf Coast, but does not have beach access because there's a huge lagoon between El Diamante and the ocean. So you pretty much have to take a taxi for 30 pesos to get out to the ocean. So why was I telling her? So I was still working my way along the Gulf Coast. I got really tight with a family in El Diamante because my first day in El Diamante, I had been towed in there by one of these Mexican cowboy mechanics who can be quite good and way cheaper than licensed mechanics, especially back in the U.S. So I was towed in there, and my very first day I walked down to a restaurant, the O'Reilly restaurant, which is run by an extended family. 3 nuclear families run that restaurant, and they are gorgeous people. And the little 400-person pueblo of El Diamante was a real respite for me because my first several months in Mexico had been pretty chaotic, not knowing the language and lost a lot of the time. Huge culture shock. So grounding myself in El Diamante was really good for me. The family that I got so close to had 2 huge parties while I was there. The first was a quinceañera party, and it was quite an honor that I got invited to it. And I've talked a lot about that. About a month later, they had another big party, a 100th birthday party for the mom of the Don of the 3 nuclear families that ran the restaurant. Grandma Abuela O'Reilly, the restaurant was named after her, and her husband was Miguel. Don Miguel. Don is the term of honor. It was his mom was having her 100th birthday party. So a lot of people came in. One of the most fascinating people that came in was a woman named Irene, who was clearly a lot more sophisticated than these folks. Really interesting, great sense of humor, and I was taken with her. And she lived up in Xalapa, big city, 600,000 people, state capital, and I ended up spending 3 months up there, originally to see Irene. And we ended up being friends, and actually I've seen her down here in Veracruz because of the many, many cousins who came in for those 2 big parties. One is a woman named Florence who lives with her family here in Veracruz, and I'm still trying to make contact with her. So I spent 3 months up in Xalapa, cold, way up in the mountains, surrounded by cloud forests and extinct volcanoes, an extraordinary place, but cold and rainy. So I escaped from there, and I've been super, super happy down here in Veracruz. 10 months in Mexico, and some people before I came to Mexico said, you're going to have a hard time facing the poverty down there. And the poverty is certainly an issue. People tend to be poor. They're not making as much money down here, and there's a whole phenomenon of people who either migrate to the U.S. or try to migrate to the U.S. or have successfully gone there. Maybe they got green cards or work permits, and I've met a lot of people who have worked in the U.S. and come back. But the poverty is an issue. I've met very few people who are not eating. The extended families are so tight that most people, even though if they have a very modest standard of living, are happy. They're overall happier than people in the U.S. And even in the U.S., I was friends with homeless, and traveling in a camper van was technically homeless for my whole 2.5 years of traveling in the U.S. And in several places, I hung with homeless people because I'd be poor at the end of every month. I'm still living on a Social Security check. So I was used to poverty. And really, the abject poverty of South Texas was more miserable, more pathetic than anything I've seen in Mexico. Because the family structure is so solid in Mexico that you get help. And very few people are not eating. I saw much worse poverty in South Texas, where the gap between the rich and the poor is so astonishing. My son is black, biracial, identifies black, and been a hip-hop music fan for a long time. And early in the hip-hop music era, which I guess now is 50 years, they just celebrated the 50th anniversary. Maybe it was Run DMC had a song called I Ain't Got Nothing For You, Man. And it's about guys coming up looking for a handout. And it's a little on the cold side, I ain't got nothing for you, man. But you do sometimes run into situations where you have to internally or externally say, I ain't got nothing for you, man. No tengo dinero, perdón. No, I can't buy your little lollipop even though you're asking for a love offering because I got nothing. And that's my case right now because I bought a brand new car battery and a brand new charger for my phone. My old iPhone is tough to keep charging, and I'm a writer and a videographer, and that phone is my career, my work. So I've had big expenses, and so it ran out of money 2 weeks into the month. So I've been broke. And even in Veracruz, which is a beautiful, beautiful city, and not a lot, well, you get off the beaten path and you find poverty anywhere in Mexico. So I've had times, there's a guy downtown in the Centro District in Veracruz who's got no legs. And he's there on his little sheet of cardboard. And I don't think I've ever literally said to him, I have no dinero, but I just kind of don't look at him because I can't give him nothing. And all this came up now because I like to feed the street dogs and I like to feed the birds. And there was a pigeon. And I'm getting one meal a day. I've had more food insecurity in Mexico than I ever experienced in 2.5 years in the U.S. So it helps me identify with the poor, and I embrace it. Right now I've got no money for another 6 days, but I have a real good relationship with the guy who's the restaurant manager at Punta Azul, and we've worked out an arrangement where I can have breakfast there every day. So one meal a day is good. But I've got no extra food. Oftentimes I've had cheese, crackets, little Ritz crackers are very popular down here, or saladitas or saltines. I love those. And if I've got cheese in the car and crackers or a box of cereal or something, usually I've got something I could give to a bird, but I had nothing even for this bird. Yeah. So the Buddhists have a teaching about all that I learned kind of the hard way. I learned it in a very painful situation. I have one blood brother who's died several years ago, and 5 stepbrothers, 3 of whom have died from the same congenital kidney condition that killed their mom. Our families merged when I was a sophomore in high school, and the boys on the Malarkey side were still quite young, some of them. And the baby, who I think was like 7 when the families merged, was Jim. And Jim did well. He had that congenital kidney condition. He was in Houston, which I didn't know Texas until recently, but I just spent a year in Texas, South Texas, and skirted around Houston because I found it horrifying. But he was being treated at the big cancer center in Houston, MD Anderson, something like that. But maybe the best cancer place in the U.S. And he had a kidney transplant that failed. And they fail typically because the anti-rejection drugs they give them, so they don't reject the organ, drop your immunity, and a cold, if you get a cold, it can take you out, and that's what happened to him. He died of a cold in his 40s, I think. So his body had been flown back to Chicago, where we were, and we were preparing for his funeral. And I had taken my mom to the funeral home to make the arrangements. And there was going to be a day in between and then the day of the funeral. Well, that family had lots and lots of problems. It had been a really terrible blended family. Alcoholic dad and so much pain in the family. And as happens with lots of families, it's at times when the family's supposed to come together for a wedding or a funeral that the shit hits the fan. And I knew that the alcoholic brother John, the issues, is he going to show up? He created so much pain for my mom and stepdad through his alcoholism that my mom's Irish, was Irish, and it's classic for Irish of the day that when you're out, you're out. And he was out for her. She was a very loving woman, but she hated him and went to her grave, I think, never forgiving him. So all this shit was in the air. Who was going to come, who's not going to come. I was in agony myself because even with all my background as a psychologist and a management consultant, my tools were nothing compared with the pain in that family. So I was living in Rogers Park, beautiful neighborhood along Lake Michigan, which is the closest I knew to an ocean back then. And I took the L back home, got off the L, and in the couple of blocks between my apartment in Rogers Park and the L, there was at that time the center for the Tibetan Buddhist group Shambhala that followed Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who was a very popular teacher who was out in Boulder, Colorado. And his most famous student is Pema Chodron, who has written the book When Things Fall Apart, which is a phenomenal book about how when things fall apart, they can be the good time because it's a chance to put your life together in a different way. But I'd never gone to programs there. I knew where the center was. And I was walking by and I said, I'm in so much pain. Let's go in and see if they're doing anything tonight that might be helpful to me. And they had just had a talk about the Buddhist Great Heart of Sadness, and I hadn't heard the talk. So during the Q&A, I apologized, said, I didn't hear the talk. Can you please tell me, what is this Buddhist Great Heart of Sadness? And the teacher said, picture that you're standing by a river and your children have fallen in the river and you have no arms. No arms. You can't help them. That's what human life can be. If you open your heart, if you are keeping your heart open and you notice, are willing to see and experience the pain around you. A lot of people just shut it out or blame the poor. But if you're willing to let yourself really see the suffering of your brothers and sisters, which sometimes you can help, and I sure do everything I can to help. I won't drive by a person with the hood open on their car. I'm going to stop and try to help. But sometimes you can't help. That guy with no legs in Veracruz the other day, this pigeon, couldn't help. That's the Buddhist Great Heart of Sadness. Yeah. Okay. I got no way to finish that on a lighthearted note, except to say that that's the path of liberation. To let yourself feel it all. Don't resist any of it. Feel the pain, do the grieving, love them anyway, even when you can't help them. Street people, I've been on the street flat out, I think 12 days in the last 4 years. And what I've learned is they want acknowledgement. They want you to say hi. They want you to look them in the eye. Sometimes just to hear their story. Like, what's your story, man? How'd you end up on the street? But even when you don't have time to that, just, buenas tardes, senor. Call him senor, give him some props. Something. Feel the pain and don't disconnect. Connect around the pain, because you know pain, and I know pain. I've had way more than my share in my 70 years, and it's helped. It's helped a lot. Yeah, it has. It's helped. Okay.